Thank you.
With, we can review the agenda. Well, let's do a roll call first.
Michelle, you gonna do roll call?
And do roll call. Richard Seiler,
Present.
Joe Mann,
Present.
Dale Robbins,
Present.
DG Garcia,
Present.
Tim Olson, Stephen Ramirez, Jim Bunker,
Now, may I just say that all three of them did contact me over the course of the last 2 days to let me know that they were unable to attend. So perhaps you'd like to entertain a motion to excuse them. Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry, before we go there, did you call Conrad?
He resigned.
Oh, he did? Oh. Did you tell us that last time?
I thought I sent out an email to that effect. He did
Okay.
resign.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Let's excuse, do I have a motion to excuse Stephen Ramirez, Tim Bunker, and or Jim Bunker and Tim Olson?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we'll excuse those three individuals. So we do have a quorum. With the quorum, let's go ahead and I don't really think we should do the workshops.
Okay.
I'd love to hear what you had to say about these things though, so. probably should do it. But do we have the? I just think there should be more involved with when we're doing these workshops, especially the two that are in front of us, especially the mini storage one.
Yes.
The parking I'm not as concerned with.
Okay.
Um,
Well, and I think that you were actually interested in both of them, Joe? Or just the parking?
I'm probably interested in both, but I'm here to speak on the parking.
Okay. So I should
So
go
why
over,
don't
we can go through the RD and mini storage and then workshop it again, but it might give you some food for thought. And since Joe's interested in it, it would be worth going through. I'll be quick.
Input, you guys want to go ahead and go through it all? Okay.
I think particularly since he's taking the time to be here.
Right,
we
yeah,
should.
for bicycles especially, I would appreciate that, since we do have somebody that wants to talk about it, we should go through that one. Or parking, I should say, for bicycles. Yeah,
I know what you meant.
but,
I will likely be the future workshop, so I wouldn't, necessarily
yeah, but
make it.
I think we could go through it and get an idea of what we got in front of us. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
let's, so let's go ahead and go through the workshops. And then but first, let's go ahead and look at our minutes from June 8th. We did not have a July meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions with our minutes from June 8th? I don't either, so we can move to approve those. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? With that, we approve the minutes from June 8th, and I'll let you go ahead, Lisa. I'll use your discretion. Does our guest want to do both parking and bikes, or would you rather, we can always flip the bikes around and do the parking first?
Oh, no, I'm interested in hearing. what
Okay.
you guys are thinking.
Okay,
All right, so, regarding RV and mini storage, so the potential zones that we are considering possibly allowing RV and mini storage as a limited use, could be, C1, the community commercial, C2, freeway commercial, I, light industrial, and in the river district, the RDM zone, which, Greenstone previously had applied to allow for this use in that zone. And also RDC, which is freeway commercial, because I think it's very comparable to our freeway commercial, which is probably, of all the zones, it's the zone that it would be most appropriate in. Okay, last time we went through the history of outdoor vehicle storage and RV parks and mini storage, and I'm not gonna go over that again, but initially it was allowed as a conditional use in the I zone. And in 2017, after Douglas proposed an RV park and campground, the city passed the moratorium. Now, he was grandfathered in, but they passed the moratorium until they could adopt changes to the zoning ordinance. And it was permanently incorporated as not being allowed in any zoning within the city by ordinance 241 in 2017. As I said, Bridgestone had proposed doing it, and that was shot down in 2018. So we do have 2 existing mini storage on the north side of the freeway. One is in the C2 zone, which is freeway commercial. The other is in the M2 zone, which is the mixed use zone. We talked about similar types of allowed uses where we have it as limited or permitted that have similar impacts last time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We can go back if you want to a little bit later. But what we talked about at our last workshop had to do with identifying the concerns that the commission had that could potentially be mitigated through limited use standards. And so the ones that we identified, the first 2 are relatively easy to address. First one is maintenance. We actually have a property maintenance code, City Development Code 10.3I. We also have one in the River District. And so we have the ability to enforce as it relates to concerns about maintenance. As for security, we could simply require a condition where they're allowed to have 24-hour access, or they're required to have 24-hour access control. That would be one way to handle the concerns about security. Arguably, security is not as much of our concern as it would be potential users or the property owner, but again, we certainly can address that. The third one had to do with aesthetics, and that's the one I want to spend a little bit of time on today. The last one was environmental considerations.
Are you going to still talk more on security or not?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
So first of all, aesthetics. So in many communities where there's mini storage that's adjacent to residential zones or in a neighborhood commercial type of setting, one of the in the city of Spokane, they do allow for mini storage in their neighborhood centers and corridors. And actually, the one on the lower right, the one on the upper right is in the West Plains Center, and the one in the lower right-hand corner is in the Hilliard area, right where the old Mann Center used to be, just as Market Street turns into a couplet. And I wanted to show these examples. The other one is just one I found offline. What we're finding is that a lot of communities where they have aesthetic concerns have actually required the use of the building itself to actually create that buffer. So the visual screen from what might be stored inside, whether it's just traditional mini storage or whether there's some outdoor vehicle storage that's allowed. So I just wanted to share that as a context. And let's see. So thinking out loud about potential standards for limited use, one of the things that we certainly could require that standalone outdoor storage is not permitted at all. Can't screen it, whatever. However, all outdoor storage and all outdoor storage shall be completely screened from view using buildings with exterior walls meeting architectural design standards. And I'll talk about those design standards in just a second. Entrance gates could be required to be designed so that they're fully site obscuring. So that we have the wall of the building, you have an entrance gate. The entrance gate is fully site obscuring unless it's open. And again, storage facilities could be required to maintain 24-hour access control. Again, that's addressing the security concerns. And all vehicle storage could be required to be undercover. That's speaking to a concern that Tim Olson raised related to the fact that you're up on a hill and you're looking down, you're still going to be able to see the vehicles. And that all parking should be on an impervious surface approved by the city, and that all drains should be equipped with an oil water separator. That is the standard for an auto repair shop. So so we could use the same standard when dealing with RV storage. I did want to show you that, so the vehicle storage undercover, we actually had an image of that in this picture right here. So the thought being that if you're going to have outdoor vehicle storage, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a full building. If it's interior to that building that we talked about. But if you have the overhead, it'll address the concern about views from our topographically elevated areas. So, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about ideas, and these are really pretty consistent with what we have today in our just standard building architectural standards. But it's speaking to that design that we saw for Hilliard, because I really like the way they did that exterior building. And it is still all mini storage, but they still use windows and canopies and articulation to make it still feel like it was pedestrian oriented and welcoming. And so the thought would be that we could look at some architectural design standards specifically for the outward facing exterior buildings. Obviously, the interior of it could be just regular mini storage, but what we see from the outside, from the outward facing walls of the building, could incorporate articulation and divide large masses through such techniques, including but not limited to building offsets, projections, modulation, recessed or projected entries, windows, canopies, etc. What we have in our design standards today, right? And also those exterior facing walls could incorporate, we could require that they incorporate architectural detailing through the use of varied materials and features in a manner that breaks up large surfaces and provides spacing and articulation. And I want to go back because I think if you look at this, that's exactly what they have done on this. And I'll tell you, when you drive through Hilliard, my daughter lives up in that general area, so I do actually do that fairly frequently. It actually is, it's actually very aesthetically pleasing, and it seems Liberty Lake-esque.
Is the Hilliard design, does it, for those exterior walls, higher than a normal, like a 6-foot fence or an 8-foot
Oh, yes,
wall? of the
no, this
building?
is
Are these-
actually a storage building.
Is it like a 2-story wall?
It is,
Good.
yeah, I
Well, I
mean-
say that, the one out at Airway Heights, they have kind of a 2-story, so it's a little more, you know, I hate to use the term, but it's kind of like the old forts, you know, you got the big walls and
Right.
you don't know what's going on inside the compound. And-
Right.
And that's kind of what they did out at Airway. It's a much taller wall on the outside.
and you could do that also, and that would, so like a much taller wall that would provide that same sort of screening and articulation. I mean, the walls that they have that would be like RV park are not bad. But they have to be, the point is that it has to be fully site obscuring. So that means that you have to be tall enough to do that. So that, you know, there would be options through our alternatives methods, our alternative methods section. Same thing if you had a site that where it, like we were just looking at Northwest Trends facility and design review, and how that bumps right up against a supremely steep slope. So you're really not going to see the back side of that. So you could use that hillside as a means to screen one side of it, we still have to address the other three sides, as an example. We don't have a lot of sites like that left in the city of Liberty Lake. There's probably one or two. Anyhow, so that was kind of the thought on the design standards. And again, as it relates to the environmental concerns, just having the same standard that you would with the automotive repairs. Basically, that's how they deal with it. If you have a drain, it's got to have an oil water separation, period. And if it's an impervious surface, then it's not going to be leaching into the groundwater. So I just, I'm interested in your thoughts, your questions, etc. I do think that we should bring this back to a larger group, but I'd really like to hear what you're thinking about that approach. And then if we like that approach, or if we have some tweaks to that approach, the second issue is then what zones do we allow it? And do we allow it as a limited use? Which is a different question.
It would always be a limited use in each of the zones.
Yes, that we would put the standards I just described to you would be the standards for that limited use. We would
Okay.
give it its own special standards.
And we would get cut at those standards.
Yes.
Before we pushed it on, of course.
Yes,
When we-
I haven't really.
This is kind of the outline of what we can go do.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, so this is what first blush kind of thought about, thinking about, so how do we get at the concerns that you expressed?
Well, I think we have to go, well, you guys can all talk too, but I think we have to go to those standards. I think we have to make it limited. I think we have to put some stuff in there that keeps it very aesthetic, and I think you need to make sure I look at, my son has a place he takes his RV to over in Post Falls. It's very inexpensive. They've got covered storage, and the front of it looks okay. You get inside and it just, they've taken gravel areas and have got these cars that should be in the junkyard, not in the storage area, and all kinds of stuff. And so that one where you talk about our code to go enforce the standards too, we gotta make sure we have that as part of our limited use, recognizing that, so.
Absolutely, and see, one of the things is that, and our code's pretty good about, and very clear about the fact that vehicles should be parked on impervious surfaces. And so, but I think that to avoid the challenges that you might have, we spell it out specifically. This is a requirement that all parking surfaces are paved with an impervious surface, whether it's concrete or whether it's asphalt.
That seems like what we've been trying to do for everything, set the standards so that there is no misunderstanding. So when there's an enforcement of something, everyone's well aware, we've set the standard, although it might be higher than other communities and cities. It's a standard we will be noted for. So if anyone wants to come and do something in our city, they know
Right.
what the restrictions would be.
And again, as I stated when I started this, we originally had conditional use permit. In my opinion, conditional use permits are administratively burdensome to the property owner. It puts a lot of cost and process into something that at the end of the day, if the development meets the standards, it has to be approved. So I think it's just this is more of a streamlined process to get at the same thing. You provide the standards up front that are absolutely ironclad required, and that's the only way it can be permitted.
Because when you look around, you see, because of the conditional use permits, what some of the things look like by default. And so if, yeah, I agree. We want to set it so that we do not put ourselves or any other commission later on, or any advice we give to the council, puts them in a situation where someone says that they don't like our standards. Well, when they come in, they know what they are, and they don't move too often.
Well, and I agree. None of these standards are too onerous on a potential developer. You know, other than the oil water separators, these things are cash cows. They're hugely profitable. There's very little cost ongoing with these once the initial investment is made. Very little maintenance required. So I think having them do it right when they come in makes a whole lot of sense. And none of these are terribly expensive at all. So I like what you've done.
The oil and gas separator addresses the concern that Joe and I had at the last meeting. And speaking on behalf of my neighbors who have elevated property, I think is what you topographically elevated property. I like the overhead point. So thank you.
Your thoughts? Rick, I know you had a lot of concerns, and but you also had some ideas about places
So
where.
one of the things that, when I came to Liberty Lake, I remember sitting in one of these meetings in my early days of being on the planning commission. And it was around the time they put the moratorium on those. And one of the things that came about was always, we don't ever want to look like Spokane Valley. Whether that's a good statement or a bad statement, it's a statement that was made. And I don't know how to phrase this, but I think that what would happen if we approved storage, mini storages, and somebody decides, like you said, it's a cash cow, let me go line all of that away with mini storages.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
I know maybe not think that's going to happen, but what if we become all our usable land that's in these zones becomes mini storages? What's that going to look like for Liberty Lake?
I don't think the council would, I think it is more likely that even though they give the conversation consideration, I do not speaking for them, because I'm not on the council, but I don't think that the community at large would be too appreciative of that sort of thing. So that's a little bit of a fear perhaps, but it's not.
But once you give it a go-ahead, you can't control if they meet the requirement. You can't control whether they put in, 3 square miles of mini storages, or whether they put in. Well, I know the city's only so many square miles big, but
So that's,
just a thought. I'm trying to think ahead of us not looking like you drive into Liberty Lake and we're just a community of mini storages.
I absolutely appreciate that. The other thing I'm gonna say is that, knowing what's in our pipeline, I know it's not gonna happen.
And you say that because you don't think there's land available to do that.
I think that the land that is available is too valuable for that. And I think that, just saying.
Well, and I don't know how you would limit it without some kind of prohibition to it.
Right, that's the problem when you run into that is you could line.
So,
I know you
but
said
there
it's
is
too
a way,
valuable
there
to
is
do
a
that.
way that you could do it, and again, getting back to, part of the question is, how do you do it in terms of standards? The other half of the question that we haven't even talked about, and should have the whole group here to talk about, is which zones do we allow it in? So we don't necessarily have to allow it in all those zones. We can pick and choose where it would be appropriate to allow it.
And maybe that's another way to limit how much of an area it could cover. Because that's another concern I have. I'm not sure I'm dead against mini storages or RV storage areas if we have the standards that keep the aesthetics at a high level, but I also don't want to see it overtake the city as that's the, because I know a guy that he vacations all the time. He owns a mini storage and it pays for him to travel the world. I know these things that you say it's too valuable, but people recognize with little to no overhead expenses, these things are just bring in the money like crazy.
And if that was our goal, to become a cash cow based on a particular industry, then I think our council, they're different people than that. And I really appreciate Lisa saying that the standards can be set on what's allowable in a particular area to avoid the fear of that happening. And if those things are put in place early enough, then the companies and developers who want to come in and do something with that particular amount of land will be different, because if it's not allowable, then there won't be. I think we have the opportunity to put the checks and balances in early by not being, by not allowing every area to permit everything. And that's the beauty of the commissions, boards, advisors. We have the opportunity to say, here's some goal setting, and here are some preventative measures if we do this versus do that. Of course, if it's allowable and something comes in, yes, it can line the whole city. But if we are stewards and say, nope, well, we're not going to allow ourselves to even allow those things, then we're in good shape.
So, Mr. Chairman, since we are considering this, possibly allowing this in the River District, would it make sense to give Joe an opportunity to speak as it relates to the River District?
In fact, he had his hand up, so I was going to go there next.
Well, I mean, I'm listening to this and as a, a developer, right, and looking for opportunities. I think in general, people in the development industry as a whole have things they're comfortable with, right? So a person likes mini storage, for instance, it's not us. We actually did a mini storage in the Spokane Valley and quickly decided, no, this is not for us. It is not just a matter of just do it and then walk away. That's not what the business is. No business is like that, quite honestly, from my experience. I'm sure it's profitable, and I'm sure people that do it well, they're, it's a living for them. And I'm sure lots of them are very successful, but it is not, every developer does not. Be all that. So that would be just one comment. The second comment I make when I look at, I'm familiar with the Hilliard project. I'm also familiar with the Airway Heights project, which I think is the same developer because it has the same, street fronting look. The buildings are nice, the materials are nice, the quality is nice, but to me, and again, when we talk about aesthetics, everybody's gonna have their own opinion. To me, they feel very military-like. You said fort, right? They feel like a fort, or they feel like a jail or something like that to me. When you have a 14-foot wall, you know, back of sidewalk, 5 or 10 feet or whatever, a 14, 15, 16-foot wall, they don't feel very good. Like from my own perspective, and I'm not an RV owner, I don't own one, I thought, you know, my own perspective, something that is more varied, I guess. I think a fence and landscaping can be more attractive. It might not be 100% site steering, but if you have elevated landscaping standards, my own opinion, that can blend in better and feel better than a 15 or 16-foot wall. So these are things that I'm just putting in front of you to consider, because I, you know, to be honest with you, I worry that that you had a bunch of 14 and, or even just a few 14 or 15, 16-foot walls, you know, lining the street doesn't feel very good. That's my own feeling on it. But I think it's, you know, pertinent and important for you guys to consider those, you know, aspects. And then the last question I have, and I wasn't here for the previous conversations and the concerns on this matter. One question I had is, are the feelings you guys have on this subject differing for a dealership versus a storage facility? Because, you know, none of these ideas that you talked about are ideas that have been talked about or been enforced for a dealership that have, you know, same vehicles and things like that. So I'm just curious why there's a different feeling for a dealership versus individual storage.
I think that's a great question. And I kind of scrolled past this. In our past workshop, we looked at the similar types of uses that are actually allowed in those zones, and that's part of the question. How is this so different from those uses? And so that was part of the question. And we do have some standards related to each of those. You're going to find that most of these are as a limited use. But again, and the limited use standards provide for a means of mitigating the things that people are most concerned about. And so anyhow, so that's the conversation. That's what we're trying to get to. So
Yeah, I don't think I was ever pertinent to the main concerns
right.
relating to it. So
Right, and that's the conversation. No question that we have to have another workshop on this, but I thought it was worthwhile because at least several of you had some of the greatest concerns related to this. So I thought it was worthwhile for you to at least share this information to give you some time to digest it, and we can talk when we have a full commission. Yeah. So, any other thoughts?
I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done on this.
Absolutely. That's my job. And actually, I have to also give props to Amy. She did a lot of the research for me also.
And I think we can also, while we're doing the review with the comments you made, we can go look at some things on it. I'm not going to go answer your questions, but at the same time, I think we can go look at things.
Next workshop is on parking standards. And so for this, I want to escape my screen. And I want to, this is easier to, where is it? So, I think it's way easier for us to just walk through the red line version. And
we have an extra set of this, if you'd like to look at the red line version.
I think do it,
Okay.
at least initially, I haven't spent a lot of time on it, but I. Well, no,
So I'm gonna go through, last time we workshopped city development code for the parking standards, and as I said at the end of that meeting, that we were gonna go through and trying to create some consistency between the city standards and the River District standards. And as I went through the River District, I realized that there were some things that I liked better in the River District than I liked in the city standards. So I actually made quite a few more changes in the city district or the city standards. And you'll see that aside from the electric vehicle infrastructure, which we added last time, there's also a new section on drive-through facilities. And actually, when Wake Up Coffee was coming in, that was one of the things that surprised me. We were one of the few jurisdictions that I've ever worked in that did not have standards for drive-through facilities. And so things like how many queuing spaces should you have and those sorts of things, how it's supposed to be configured. We do have a little bit of that in, we have a very little bit of that in the limited use standards for drive-throughs in the mixed use zones. But it really isn't very explicit, and it's very limited. And as I was looking at the River District, they did a really good job of providing design standards for that. So again, I'm going to walk you through. So we cleaned up our purpose statement and deleted some language in here to make it a little cleaner. There was a lot of unnecessary language in there that didn't help define what the purpose was. In terms of vehicle parking standards, I did go through and the table is really based upon the Institute of Transportation Engineers standards. Some of these, as we said, when we started this process, one of the reasons why we had to look at this is we had some uses that way underrepresented what needed to be parked. The great example is in industrial, where you have one parking space for every 2 employees on the largest shift. What? But we have limited transit here, but we don't have any light rail. We don't have, it was just crazy. And one of the things that we found was that people were bumping up again. We also had a maximum parking standard. There's the ability to apply for administrative variance, and many of the administrative variances that I'm dealing with have to do with parking because we don't allow for enough parking for some uses. And so that was one of the other thing is that there's it's interesting. So here as an example, so we've had 1.5 spaces for 2 and 3 family housing, but yet in simplifying multifamily and single family, forgetting and single family attached housing, simplifying the requirements based upon number of bedrooms, which is silly and ticky-tack. And oh, by the way, people change their plans, or they add bedrooms, or they delete bedrooms, and very often that changes the parking calculation, and that's just silly. So we looked at the ITE trip generation manual in terms of just looking at per dwelling unit, and it's much simpler way to administer that, the average being 1.75 spaces per dwelling unit. But why would a 2 and 3 family home only have 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit? Why would that be any different? So anyhow, so that, and I will say that 2 and 3 family homes
aren't really, the parking manual does not differentiate between multifamily and single-family attached housing. So that's, there's that. Again, most of the other changes, things like specialty housing, were all based on that. Restaurant, bars, ice cream parlors, again, based on the ITE. We have it based upon fixed seats, but that changes too. And so that's a challenging way to look at it. Theaters, auditoriums, and stadiums, that makes more sense to base it on fixed seats, but also providing a provision for gross square footage. And again, these are kind of taking the average that from the parking manual. And so industrial and manufacturing uses. Again, this is one where one space per employee, we changed it from one space per 2 employees, or one space per 1,000. So in one case, we raised it, in the other case, we lowered it based upon the ITE trip generation manual, because it looks at it both ways. Self-service storage facility. Again, this this is just, while we don't allow it now, we may be allowing it, and we do have some existing grandfathers. So again, consistent with what's being recommended in the parking manual. Childcare centers, same thing. And chapels and mortuaries and churches, which all are pretty much the same class of use. Golf courses, we were spot on with what was in the trip generation manual. Supportive housing, we just changed it based upon the way we changed our code related to housing. Yes, I'm sorry.
Golf courses were right on with the manual.
Yeah.
That surprises me because so Trailhead has going to have 72.
100 and so Trailhead never met the standards for parking. In
Will
our
it in the future though, if they do
yes,
they'll have 72
it actually
spots?
exceeds it. It actually exceeds it.
Okay.
I think it's got 100. I think where we ended was 132, but it could be 142. It was in that we were going back and forth with minor reconfigurations to the lot at the very end of the process. But it's,
And not that it matters, but does Meadowwood and Liberty Lake have 144 spots, you think? They might, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. I thought that was a high
So
number.
they were all vested before the city incorporated. So
No, I understand that, and I know these rules don't apply to them, but I was just curious.
again, I can't. I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question. It's a good question. I do not know the answer. Again, hospitals. I don't see us ever having a hospital, but I don't have a perfect crystal ball. Mine's a little cracked and clouded. One of the things that we do find it's really challenging standards that are based on number of classrooms and whatnot, because the schools are designed for a specific capacity of students, and that's really the best way to figure out the required parking spaces. And it is different for high schools versus elementary schools versus colleges and universities. Spectator sports facilities, I actually really took this right out of ITE. And I think what we had there was one space per 150 gross square feet. So is that interior, exterior? It didn't even make any sense to me. So we looked at interior indoor facilities as well as sports fields. And so we used soccer fields as the standard because that gets probably.
This, hospitals, is that correct? 4 spaces per bed?
Yes. And if you think about it, think about how many support personnel are there are. And orderlies and maintenance people and cafeteria workers and.
33, looking to meet a man who knows what he wants.
That was, and that was actually one that had a lot of studies too. Or 2.5 spaces per 1,000 gross square feet, whichever is greater, so. But there were a lot of, there were a lot of data points in that particular study, so. As I recall.
On colleges and universities, it seems like that's an odd one in that they go by square footage, where most of the other schools go by students. And most of these have or if they do include square footage and whatever is more, whatever it is.
I actually know the answer to this though. So I actually know the answer. It's because colleges and universities depends upon the type of campus you have, how much they're spread out or whatnot. It depends upon if you have part-time, full-time students, evening students, all sorts of different schedules. So there's not, universities are not necessarily rated for X number of students. They're rated for their occupancy of the building, which is why it goes back to a square footage basis. And the square footage is not exterior square footage, it's building square footage, it's classroom space at the end of the day.
So it's classroom and not gymnasiums and everything else.
Well, no, it's all of that. It's indoor facilities.
Okay. Should we say state that in here? Rather than.
I guess per 1,000 gross square feet of building. Is that?
You do on sports facilities.
I do on sports facilities in part because I'm like, the number made absolutely no sense to me, and I couldn't find anything anywhere that justified that number. It was just.
I like clarity and.
Okay,
and
gross
so-
square feet of building.
I still don't quite understand how they figure it that way, but
Well,
I get what you're saying, but it still.
This
seems
is
like
all
it would
based
be
on
statistical.
statistical studies where they actually literally look at parking demand through a series of studies. So as I mentioned, we did remove the section on maximum number of parking spaces. Again, parking is expensive. Both the land and the cost of doing it and the stormwater treatment that you need to do with it. People generally do not construct more parking than they need in the development community. However, too little parking can actually negatively impact the business model. And so when somebody comes to me and says, well, I've got 5 of these credit unions, and I know that in all of these I need X number of parking spaces per, and your code doesn't allow me to do that. Even with at 150, we had 150% of the minimum parking spaces was the maximum. And in the last year, I think I've had 3 or 4 administrative variances where they've come in and they've documented based upon their actual use. They need more parking. And that tells me that we've got a disconnect.
Lisa, I had a question about hotels and motels.
Yes.
1 space per guest room?
Give me a second. plus one space per employee on the largest shift, plus one space per 150 gross square feet of meeting or conference rooms. Restaurants, et cetera, require additional spaces based upon the others. So you're looking at all the uses within it. So it's per room plus employees is what you're looking at. And I think that, I think that that's a reasonable standard. But then again, like I said, if you have other accessory, you've got conference space, that's calculated based on gross square footage of meeting rooms. If you have a restaurant, it's actually based on the same restaurant standard we have everywhere else. So, and again, that's based upon a number of studies. Let's see what else we have. So again, child care centers having 13 or more children, and nursery preschools. It's 1.5 spaces per employee, and that goes back to student ratios and whatnot, or one space per 100 gross square feet, whichever is greater. And again, that's dealing with occupancy, et cetera. I think we pretty much have covered most of these. So credit for on-street parking. So we had originally allowed the credit for on-street parking just in mixed-use zones. But again, thinking about like the Knox area where we restriped it to allow for both bike lanes and parking, because parking is so tight for many of those businesses there. We see a lot of employees parking on the street. We see a lot of business parking on the street on Knox. And so we think that it's reasonable to have the same standard that you get to use the on-street parking. Now, the one thing that we do call out is that, and this is that it has to be adjacent or contiguous with the subject property. And the reason for that requirement is that they get to count it towards their required parking. So you can't be double counting. So if it's, you can't count the spaces that are within a walking distance from yours, because everybody else on the block is also counting that. It doesn't work that way. We end up double and triple counting those parking spaces and still end up with the jammed up on parking.
So can we talk about on-street parking?
Yeah.
So we had on-street parking, and I'm always bad with the streets around here, but over by, there's an apartment complex on the north side that's off of Mission.
Bitterroot.
Bitterroot, yes. And there's on-street parking there for a number of years, and people put their motorhomes and their boats and their extra vehicles all along that street. And then the city came in, and I'm not faulting the city for doing that, but they came in and put no parking all along there.
No parking during the winter, and there's a reason for that.
I think it's no parking altogether. I think they put that whole street there that used to allow, it was all lined up with on-street parking because there wasn't enough parking spots inside the complex for all the.
Are you talking about Bitterroot, or are you talking about Indiana?
I'm talking about the street that goes down by Bitterroot, whatever one, you know.
So that is Bitterroot. So that is Bitterroot. It's so.
You remember when we closed off the street parking? Go ahead.
Yes, please.
So, yes, it's Bitterroot Lane, Bitterroot Road. And it, it's wide enough for parking on both sides. And what ended up happening is it ended up being storage. It ended up being boats and trailers. And so actually it was a request by us to do the no parking. So that was only because there was no mechanism to enforce people from not parking boats and trailers and those sorts of things. our preference, and I talked to the city about this recently and talked to the police department about it. Our preference is that it would be parking, but it would not be storage parking.
And we have a 72-hour rule, so I'm
Yeah.
not sure why that, whether it was a conflict avoidance thing or what.
I don't know, I mean, it was our understanding back then that the police department was not going to enforce it. My recent conversation with the city police department was probably different. So, I mean, if it's enforced, if it's enforced and not allowed to be a storage facility on the road, then we would for sure support it going back to being parking.
Well,
I believe it should be, but it shouldn't be storage parking.
Well, and again, this maybe speaks to the other workshop that we just had and the fact that there may be a need for us to.
Oh, there for sure is a need for storage.
Well, but people won't pay for that want to do that. I mean, there was storage at the time that was available. I mean,
Yeah, there are probably a certain percentage of people that are just gonna do whatever they can to not pay.
right, if you
I
can
agree.
park it where people won't make a comment. But back to one of the reasons I brought that up was because if you allow on-street parking to take your parking, to allow your parking to be part of your parking allowance, and then you close off on-street parking, now you're substandard on your parking allowance. And so that's problematic. And the other item is we see, especially again, at Bitterroot, at apartment complexes where you have a lot of multifamily parking, you see that the 1.75 doesn't work, until you see cars parking or trucks parking. Look at STCU across the street from STCU that supports that whole string there of on-street parking, including big semi trucks that pull in there because there's not enough parking, and I watch them walk across to their apartments too. But even STCU, who has a huge lot out back, they tend to use that on-street parking and so you have these streets that are lined with cars, which is not, I don't think is very aesthetic for the city. I'm not a big fan of on-street parking being a substitute.
Well, so there's a couple thoughts that I would share with you, particularly in our mixed use zones. It does make for a more pedestrian environment when there's on-street parking. You get smaller, you're being more efficient in your use of parking. It also has, when people are parking on street, it does also have a traffic calming effect. It does cause people to slow down because the roadway feels narrower. It shouldn't be a narrower roadway. You should have the same aisle width, but it does psychologically have the effect of causing people to feel like they have to slow down because it's a little.
It changes speed limit if it's too fast.
People, so you're an engineer, Rick. You should.
I understand this traffic stuff. I understand brake buttons, but I'm telling you, if you think they're going too fast, you have speed limits and you enforce speed limits. You don't rely on people parking cars on the streets to get people to slow down.
People will drive the speed limit that's comfortable to drive for the conditions of the street. So that's why we MUTCD standards and speed limit warrants and whatnot are based upon the type of roadway, the width of roadway, the number of approaches. There's a number of factors that go into determining what the speed limit is. And the reality is, and I can give you some great examples. City of Spokane is notorious for this, where they will decide that this street should be 30 miles an hour, but it is an arterial and it's 5 lanes wide, and there's no parking on the street, and people are going to go 40 miles an hour. They put up those little signs with the blinky signs that says speed that you're going. The Nevada corridor is a great example where they have one of those signs where I have never gone by that and seen it not say slow down. And I'm not talking about my vehicle, I'm talking about other vehicles.
I understand all that, but I'm just saying that I don't think we rely on street parking to do that, to control excessive speeds on roads. I mean,
It's-
it's a weird way to say that we have a design standard in our city code that says I'm going to have on-street parking so I don't have cars go by as fast.
That's called, it is, I swear to you, Rick, it's a traffic calming principle.
I know it is, but it's,
I agree with, oh, go ahead.
It's far more effective at slowing people down than speed limit signs. That's why, because in the end, this is what Lisa said is absolutely true. People do not make it, by and large, people do not make a conscious decision to speed. They drive at a speed that they feel is comfortable. So for instance, I will use Country Vista in Rocky Hill as a perfect example, okay? That road, for the longest time, it was really wide road section because it was an older road standard and it allowed for parking on both sides and 2 lanes of travel. So really, really wide, speed limit 25 or 30. On a routine basis, people drive down there faster than they should. And I have friends that live on the street, and my cousin lives on the street, and everybody thinks it's somebody else. Like my cousin is saying, oh yeah, the street is so fast. Everybody drives so fast. Like when you're sitting on your patio, you see people drive so fast. And then I'm sitting on my friend's patio and my cousin drives by. Look at that person driving so fast. She doesn't realize she's driving at a comfortable speed. So as a developer, we're like, this isn't good for the community. It's not good for what our goals are. And so we went in and put islands on the Country Vista to be able to, it didn't actually change. We can still drive and still park on both sides and all of that, but it changes the width and this perception of the comfort. It makes it more uncomfortable. So now they drive the speed limit instead of driving too fast.
and now I watch the school bus drive over the curb at the gate.
But if there's a small inconvenience and people are driving much less fast, it's done its,
So
in
you
my
added,
opinion.
you added a calming feature, which allows people to traverse back and forth, where the parking feature of all of the boats and RVs,
Storage is different.
the storage is different. And the storage idea, I don't know, I'm not an engineer of storage, and the big boat problem can be mitigated by perhaps having the car, the spots identified. So if you identify this spot, this size, then the only vehicle that can park in it is within the confines of that size, and have those sizes, and then that stops, and that is, it tends to stop the abuse of trailers, et cetera, et cetera. I did not know, I'm glad to be educated on this, that irrespective of a sign being posted, that's neither here nor there, because people are driving the speed of their comfort. So therefore, if we say that, therefore, what is the reason to even have a speed limit posted sign at all, if indeed we're admitting here that people are driving based on their comfort? So if someone knew that I can drive based on my comfort, then when the red lights come behind me, I can say, well, I'm just driving based on my comfort, and that's okay. So how do we-
So DG, you're taking it out of context.
No,
All I
that's what
said
I
is
say.
it's not that they should drive with their
No.
comfort, it's that they often do. It creates more of an enforcement challenge.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So if we have that challenge because people are driving what his cousin feels comfortable driving, and what this gentleman may feel comfortable driving, what the people are driving up Country Vista are driving, their comfort, they're not even paying attention to the sign.
So back to the point of parking, though, we do not necessarily require on-street parking. But if on-street parking is provided, we're giving people the opportunity to count that parking just as it touches their property. So the parking in front of your, not across the street, parking along your property line, so that we can reduce the parking, the size of parking lots, which is environmentally better for the community, the whole heat island effect, etc. It's aesthetically better. It's taking up a valuable land resource. If we're just being more efficient in how we do it. Obviously, if you don't have parking provided on street in front of your business, you have to provide the parking on your lot. So this is, and okay, no, and I understand your point. The other point, though, is, and this is, we do have a code that does prohibit parking for parking of recreational vehicles and boats, etc., on street for more than 72 hours, period. So it's not intended to be stored, and it can be enforced, and our police department does enforce.
We have Fort Harvey and boat, it's not as far. Code is written.
Then it's not storage.
I know, but it's.
There's an easy way to do it. It's all you have to do is mark the fire.
The police department struggled with that a few years ago. They have to go through that process.
Understood.
It doesn't take a while.
Yes, understood. Understood. So keep kind of going on this. The hour's getting long, and we did change some dimensions in the parking lot. Number one, the way we had approached compact parking was a little bit confusing in that we don't want on-street parking stalls to be anything less than 8 feet wide, and we do have some, but we do have depth dimensions. The other thing is that we recently approved an administrative variance for the dimensions of the parking lot, or for the parking stall. After doing a review of adjacent jurisdictions and whatnot, we found that our 24 feet was a little bit an outlier compared to other jurisdictions. 22 is generally, there was one outlier that was less than that, but generally other jurisdictions were falling within the range of 22. So after doing that research and approving an administrative variance for that, felt like it was it would make sense to reflect that. The one other thing that came up, and this is, we don't have this standard anywhere else, and so because it came up and it was really quite a ticky-tack discussion that came up about how do you measure? Do you measure from the interior of the lines or the exterior of the lines? So I stole a page from WashDOT's playbook, and they do it from the middle of the, now they have a whole big graphic that goes with it. I think all we have to say is that you measure it from the middle of the line to the middle of the next one. Keep them going. So this is something that we want to encourage shared parking. And when you have shared parking, one of the things that happens is that you don't have people aren't driving as much. They're not driving between parking lots and whatnot. You also have the ability to take advantage of kind of the differences in peak hours and turnover, et cetera. The larger the lot, the more you can take advantage of turnover. River District has a credit of 20% for shared parking. And it seems to work pretty well. And I've seen that in other jurisdictions. We did not have one in the city development code, but that we do in River District. And I thought it was worthwhile because we really do work hard to try and encourage those shared parking lots. I think it makes for a more efficient land use. It creates more connectivity between our businesses, et cetera.
What was that number? 20%.
So the 20%, so honestly, it's been working in the River District, so so I just used the same standard here. It wasn't something that I vetted any more than that.
Okay.
I can certainly do some research and see what other jurisdictions. I do know that other jurisdictions do have that credit.
I was just curious as to where it came from. It seems to be 30.
Remember in the beginning I said, as I went through River District, I found some things I liked in there that I wanted to change in the city's development code, so that this is a great example of that.
You said it's working in the River District. Do we know they're even using it? You don't have to do the 20% less, right?
You don't have to.
So you say it's working, but do we know, you like the wording, but
guess-
I'm just curious, do we know that it's working in the river?
Let me say that before our next parking workshop, I'll do a little research and see what kind of credits others are doing, because I know that they do it in the city of Spokane. I know that they do it in other jurisdictions where you have a parking lot that's shared amongst multiple users, and it is a true thing that when you have multiple users, you can reduce your parking.
And I agree with that. I'm just, you said it.
All right.
You said you got the
All right,
20%
okay,
because it was working in the river.
because it was vetted through the development review process in another.
You know, and that was my question is, was the number derived from something? Or
It
pulled
was-
out of the air?
It was, well, no, it was not pulled out of the air. It was pulled out of another code that was adopted by the city in the River District.
Was that number pulled out of the air?
I don't know the answer, but I will commit to you that I will do some research and make sure that that's a good number before our next workshop. How's that?
Thank you. We want you.
Because most all these are coming from standards, right? I mean, everything, all these like the cutting the parallel to 8 foot from 9 foot, all that stuff is standards. that
Yes,
they're
that's,
finding, right?
yes.
Because my pickup doesn't do well in some of these standards. I'm just saying.
I understand. But if gas prices remain really high, you might rethink that.
Well,
Big truck.
I like my pickup.
Fair enough. So bicycle parking standards, this is a weird one. So as we've looked at some multifamily developments and we see that we're clear about this for like large employers and whatnot, that the parking spaces can be provided with bicycle locker or other sorts of things, but it was never spelled out for multifamily. Now we have interpreted it that way, but I would like to see it being specific, because we were looking at, oh my goodness, when we were looking at the Gemstar Apartments, this was several years ago over by the high school. They had, I want to say they had something to the tune of 400 units, and they were going to be required to have 400 parking stalls or bicycle parking stalls. I mean, that's just silly. So the whole point is that you want to encourage bicycles, but that can be provided simply by providing a rack on the wall of your balcony or a storage locker or whatever, where it's secure. Exactly. So nobody's going to, anyhow, that was my point in doing this, is that, and we've interpreted it that way, but I prefer that it be explicit, because we're explicit on that for other uses. The other thing, and this again was in the River District, where in mixed use zones, bicycle parking can be clustered between businesses, or spaces may be provided as part of the public roadway improvement. So that's the other thing in more of like the Knoll as an example. You could potentially on your sidewalk, you have extra wide sidewalks and you could potentially provide an amenity. We actually have in our design standards when we look at those mixed use zones where we pedestrian amenities, we do have a provision for providing like bicycle parking in like a plaza type of thing or whatnot. And there's just so it was just I liked the idea that options for storage. Again, this is where, again, just restating that multifamily, it makes sense that long-term employee, that in addition to multifamily housing or long-term and employee parking met by bicycle storage rooms, bicycle lockers, etc., that makes sense for multifamily as well. And then no changes in loading. The last thing that this is the drive-through facilities from, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I trust you all to read it, but this is directly from River District standards because I thought that it was really well done. And then the electrical vehicle standards, a couple things to note. So originally we had this first section, which is 10.3D7 A and B is existing code. We did have to delete the part that there's no required minimum on the number of parking stalls for electric vehicle recharge stations. There is now a minimum depending upon occupancy. So this whole thing, again, we talked about this last time. This is really right out of the WAC 5150-0429. Different occupancy groups are required. Some occupancy groups are required to provide the EV parking stalls. And there's also some requirements for electrical rooms that would expand the number of those for future uses. This is, again, it's Washington code. It's in effect right now. Trying to get it out there so that our developers are well aware of what the code is requiring. I think a lot of architects are, but again, it's helpful to have this in our code so that as we're reviewing it, it's much easier to call it out as well. So that's, I did clean up the language where I was referencing paragraphs that were in the state code. And I copied and pasted this to reference the paragraphs that are in the city code now. So this was cleaned up from what we talked about last time. And so now let's switch over to River District real quickly. And I know that's what Joe's really interested in. So again, just trying to create the consistency. So consistency between the two, the two development codes, kind of moving towards that when we codify SAP with our city development code, trying to create some consistency between them. I did add a little bit of language from the city's development code because I think it's an important context. That the design of parking areas is critically important to the viability of some commercial areas, pedestrian and driver safety, the efficient and safe operation of adjoining streets, and community image and livability. Again, those kind of things that help to define why we have the standards that we have. And so it's useful to have those kind of intent statements in your purpose statement. So I thought that was valuable. Again, we similar to the city development standards. We talk about off-street parking spaces, and they include spaces in the public or private right of way, garages, carports, parking lots, and/or driveways if vehicles are not parked in tandem, because it never works if they're parked in tandem. never ends up being 2 parking spots because you're jockeying vehicles. Again, this is making this consistent. I don't know that we have a lot of accessory caretaker residences. We do have accessory dwelling units, and having a 1 parking space per unit, I think that's pretty standard in almost any jurisdiction I've worked in. Single family attached, 2 spaces per dwelling unit, that's pretty standard. Manufactured home parks are 2. The 2 family and townhouse parking, again, this is all consistent with multifamily housing and what we saw in the ITE parking generation manual. Rooming and boarding houses, dormitories, 2 spaces for every 3 beds. Similar to what we have here. Automobile repair and rental. Again, the 1 space per 350 gross square feet. That's consistent with what we have in the city development code and also consistent with the ITE parking generation manual. Again, cultural centers, museums, libraries, and athletic clubs, hotels, motels, all the same. So what you're going to see consistently is that we've, in some cases, we've made the same changes in both. In some cases, we're changing River District to reflect what's in the city development code. But again, with using the ITE parking generation manual, it's kind of like the, which is the appropriate standard. Anyhow, so I'm not going to keep going through those because you've seen all these before. Same thing for credit for on-street parking. Again, copied some standards that we have in city development code. This table, the parking standard, exactly the same one that we talked about previously. Disabled parking, this is something that we enforce it anyhow because we have to meet ADA requirements, but again, specifically called out in city development code, so it seemed worthwhile to call it out again, not something that we're not doing, but something that's better to be explicit about. Availability of facilities. This is in city development code. Owners of off-street parking facilities may post a sign indicating that all parking on the site is available only for residents, customers, and/or employees as applicable, as long as the signs conform with the sign code. And I think that that's a reasonable expectation. If you're providing private parking on your private property, you should be able to provide that signage that says this is only for so and such. We don't see it a lot. We see it a little bit like in large multi-tenanted campuses where there's multiple users, where certain spaces are designated for certain different users. But generally speaking, we don't see it a lot, but it's reasonable expectation. Bicycle parking standards, again, this is making it consistent with the city development code. There were some sections that we do have lighting standards. Bicycle parking shall be at least as well lit as the vehicle parking for security purposes, reserved areas and hazards. Again, these are things that I don't think that they're a big deal, but again, creating that consistency between the 2 codes. Again, added a little bit of language related to loading space standards. Off-street loading facilities are intended to provide adequate space to accommodate outside deliveries from large vehicles which cannot be functionally served by normal parking stalls. Off-street loading facilities must be located in such a manner that service vehicles do not block or intrude into public rights of way or block driveways or parking area circulation. Again, that standard is really, really helpful when we are reviewing plans. The drive-through. Again, I'm This is again, just providing cleaning up the language here. Grammatical stuff. And then we'll be plugging that. So I guess I'd open it up for questions or comments, but I wanted to really just kind of show you how I got to where I got on this. And certainly we can tweak these. If there's ones that you have questions on, I'm happy to bring back. My ITE parking generation manual is an electronic one. And it's an electronic one because it was like $400 cheaper than the paper copy. So if you have specific areas that you would like to look at kind of the studies, I can absolutely bring them up for you at our next presentation. So I'd love to hear if there's specific areas where you would like to take a little deeper dive into why we got to a particular parking count or whatnot. Joe, I know that you were interested in River District and had some thoughts and concerns. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, since this is really kind of a first cut on this.
I appreciate it. So first, I was just going to comment on some of the things I heard, through some of the discussion. So these are just obviously my own opinions on the matter. So one thing I'm going to just say is, in my own opinion, it's okay if parking is used, right? We build it for it to be used, and I think sometimes we get concerned when people use it more than like 50%. And so I think be really intentional when you think about problems. Is this a problem, a large amount of time, or is it might be a problem at a very isolated instance, right? Like the grocery store at Christmas or something like that, right? So that was one thing. Lisa made a really good point that, in general, developers they want to build the right parking, because if they don't build the right parking, then it's hard to get a tenant, it's hard to get a customer, it's hard, the value of your asset that you're spending many millions of dollars on is being compromised. So I think, so I think it's nice to have flexibility on the maximum side, though I would put a comment out there that, there is too much, right? That creates a bad environment for the community. So one thing to consider, I guess, is if you get to a size, is there something that helps to mitigate that size, whether it be landscaping or something of that nature. So that's just a component.
Absolutely. And we did redo our landscaping standards, and we do have, and that's the landscaping that you have to do with parking is always kind of the part of the balancing act.
Yeah.
For sure.
Anyway, just make that comment. Shared parking, it is super effective, and I would probably argue, when we did the SAP, which is where Lisa pulled the shared parking 20%, we reviewed a lot of studies. We did, there was I can't remember the name of the traffic expert helped us develop that standard. But our experience in Kindle Yards is that it's far more effective than 20%. So we're at, because of the mixed use that we have at Kindle Yards, we're about 2 parks at our peak. We're about 2 parks per 1,000, which is much smaller than, a typical, even an office building. A lot of times the office building by itself wants to be 4 to 6 parks per 1,000. So when you mix these uses, especially when you're mixing the right uses, it can be very, very effective at, getting better value out of the parking facilities. And I would argue that, obviously it depends on the mix, but under the right mix, that it's much more effective than even 20%.
And Joe, if I can make a point,
Yeah.
and that is that we do provide, for administrative variances for people who can demonstrate that based upon the mix of uses and the peak hours, et cetera, if they can demonstrate that they need less parking, we can approve a reduction in parking based upon that. So we do have a process for that. And it is, I mean, it's a very good point that if you have two totally separate uses in terms of what their peak hours are, that you can get a much greater efficiency in your parking lot. It's a very good point. The flip side of it, I would say, and I love your statistics about Kendall Yards, but we also know that's a much more urban environment, much more transit oriented, much, there's so many more rooftops within, you know, a walking distance than.
And I would agree with that. I mean, and, you know, even our plan for, you know, River District and the goal is not, we understand that, you know, we might not get to the same level as,
Sure.
as Kendall Yard, but we can see, you know, we can see the effectiveness of it. That was my point. So those were just my comments on, you know, the kind of the conversation that happened. And the rest of my comments are just in general, what I came prepared to talk about was, you know, one, we haven't spent a lot of time looking at these. We've done, you know, maybe 10 days ago or something like that. So, you know, I think our goal and our hope is that we'll go through it and provide kind of written comments that we can provide to the staff, and then, you know, hopefully in turn it gets, you know, makes its way through the process and you guys can see our more detailed comments. And I am speaking specifically about the SAP. So the first point I'm going to say is, you know, they are inconsistent with the rest of the Liberty Lakes parking standards, and they're intentionally inconsistent. You know, per our SAP narrative, the SAP standards reduce and in some cases eliminate the minimum parking standards for on-site parking. So that was a goal of the SAP when it was approved, and it was approved based on that. So I would say our general concern with the SAP is making it consistent. We're worried about the increased parking minimums, and we want to take a closer look at it. But that's our worry currently with it. We don't. They have the comment of not allowing tandem parking, and I understand it can be not a perfect scenario, but we have a tremendous amount of experience that it is not nothing. It is helpful, and it is a great way to eliminate seas of parking that are a lot of times seen with multifamily development. So that's one thing that kind of jumped out at me. And then the one caution I have on the EV parking, because I'm familiar with it because it's actually a building code. And so I just worry that the building code changes on a fairly regular basis. So it's already regulated via the building code. And I worry you put it in here and it's just something you have to update all the time. So I didn't really see the reason for it being in here because it's covered in a different code, but that was just a comment.
Well, and I think that if we hadn't had EV language in our code already, that was EV language. But it feels like we need to address the changes to the code.
Maybe it's a matter of referencing, you know, for them to reference the lack of reference the building code. Anyway, I don't want to, all I'm saying is I worry about having to change it. We're okay with it because it's the rules.
Right.
So I don't really have a concern with it. It's just more of a process issue that I'm bringing up.
I feel like when we're calling that out, people can make decisions about occupancies. Like you can decide that there's overlap for a lot of different occupancies, and you can make decisions about that based upon the fact that you have a requirement here, but if it's a different occupancy, you won't have it there. So that part of it is educating our staff, part of it is educating the development community. I do like the idea of referencing the code. The problem is I can reference RCWs and they stay consistent, but wax do not. The numbering on wax changes all the time.
No, right, I agree. You'd have to be general about it, like reference the building code in Washington, amendments for that information. But anyway, that's where you guys did talk about and discuss. I was just providing my own kind of perspective on it. So I appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you, Joe, for coming and for providing your input.
Thank you. No comments? We can move on.
So,
Okay, that's your day.
thank you, Joe. So I have nothing for you. We do have 2 vacancies. Conrad Band did resign just because his job that was working so well remotely is now not so remote. We've been pushing out for planning commissioners. If you know somebody who might be interested, absolutely encourage them to apply. We've got 1 adjunct and 1 voting member position. Again, want to say Jim is the adjunct, and he could certainly apply as a voting member. And so, but if you know of anybody else, we've had 1 application so far, and I'm going to have to schedule that when I get back from vacation. I'm going on vacation. But that's about all I have in terms of things are seriously rapid fire right now in the development world. It's very, very, very busy. And in fact, we all are challenged with the number of plates that are spinning. So, and my apologies, I did want to get this out sooner, the parking standards. I didn't have time to get to them.
I forgot to ask, is there anybody on?
So Tom Sahlberg was for a while, but he's no longer with us.
Okay, I have to take you ask that question now that we're doing things.
Yeah, and it's, so you see, I have to have 2 screens because I can't see who's on Zoom if I don't do that, and it just doesn't work very well, so.
Right.
All right.
Any reports from us?
Does anybody have a desire to report to city council?
Do you think we should? Do we have much, well, I feel like we're still working on this.
I think we're still working on it. We definitely need another workshop. I presume that you're going to want me to bring back parking for another workshop when we get their comments, and I will give him timeline.
I did realize he was so engaged with that, so.
Well, so he got it, they did get it about 10 days ago, and I really was trying to get it to them much sooner than that, but like I said, the current's been pretty rapid.
One of the things I think we got to look at on some of these is, I know River District is the way it is, but we also got to look at it and say, is it working for us?
Right.
Because we've had some parking issues around the park and those businesses, and so, we got to make that decision if again, we got to keep trying to make sure we're doing the right thing, even if we have to backtrack a little bit.
So, and one of the things that they're pushing back about is the on-street parking, and that they, I think that they have concerns related to the on-street parking, because in the River District right now, if the parking is within 200 feet of the property, they get to count it. But if you have 5 businesses within 200 feet of those parking spots, they're all counting the same parking spot.
And I'm sorry, I know what you say about traffic and control, but when you line the streets with cars, it's an ugly look. It does not look good for the city. you know, you go down residential streets and they're all lined with cars, that's not a pretty look.
Well, not only is it not a pretty look, it is big. Because the look on its own, the point you make extends to the cars that are exiting those spots when cars are going through. And those are insurance issues for people, but they are ugly look, they are some accident waiting to happen. And I couldn't agree with you more on the look, but I think what you're also saying is that look's gonna turn into something more ominous for us, we're gonna end up paying.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I've seen too many communities where street parking just overwhelmed. You know,
Well, it's a real problem there.
I mean, up by Green Lake in Seattle, for example, they have apartments in it, and the street parking is so lined, there's only one car that can get down it. Because they've allowed the street parking to take over, you know, and I mean, that's, my son lived in an apartment up in that area, and it was ugly, ugly, ugly. And
That's what Brown's edition is like.
yeah,
It's the same thing.
yeah, we don't, I don't think, I mean, I personally don't want Green Lake to look like that. I know we want to have street parking, but I don't want that to choke us.
It has to, well, we do have street standards that, where you're maintaining the width. And so that's the aisle width.
Well, and the problem with like Indiana and Hardest Parkway, in that area, you got delivery trucks making deliveries to the restaurants there, and the coffee shop, and they park in the street. And there's a median, so people are having to go on the other side of the street to get by. And now with Mission blocked off, that is a major problem.
You notice that in River District standards, I did add the loading requirements. And I did, was specific about the standards for those loading spots for precisely that reason.
And, you know, we talk about things like the, not that it's part of the parking thing as much, but the on Country Vista down there on Country Vista and so where am I at? In Rocky Hill, there's those islands they put in there. Those islands, I watched the school bus because it has to make the right turn off of Reston, that's the street, I think, that it has to make the right turn there. And it has to back up, which is a danger anytime you have a school bus and kids. Because it can't, because that island is too close to the intersection.
So this was.
And so, you know, I know he says it's that little inconvenient. It's not a little inconvenient, it's a danger. And as we develop that direction on, and Stonehill, right, Stonehill develops the school buses have to turn there. You don't have a choice. So anyways, just a point.
Well, and that was a retrofit with those islands and those, they were not exactly, they didn't exactly follow development standards in terms of turning in a permit for
Yeah,
that.
you think
So-
that residential,
so it
we have
never
small
moved away.
cars, but we don't. We have school buses, people.
What prevents us from having our own supervisors out there supervising and doing things? And as you just said, or maybe I misheard you, that some of these things were not permitted. Why does that keep happening? And
It doesn't keep happening.
no, I didn't.
It happened. It happened in a particular time frame with a particular staff person that.
Oh, okay. You're not talking about the developer. You're saying that it was an oversight by a particular individual who.
Right, the developer proposed something and they just kind of went out and said, oh, and I put it here and here and whatever, and at the time, the engineer accepted that and without necessarily having a full plan set. It was,
Thank you for clarifying. Because I was saying, how does that happen if we are really
No.
not focused?
oh,
Thank
no,
you.
we're really focused, and that's one of the reasons why we're so very diligent about our plan reviews and whatnot, because
Thank you for clarifying. 'Cause I started to get worried. We would know.
And changes had to be made on some things, but they didn't fix everything.
Yes.
I don't, since we have no citizens, I guess we can adjourn.
And it's not even 6 o'clock yet.
I know, we got 15 more minutes to chat.
Well, if we're gonna chat, it's too bad we can't do something about drive-through standards retroactively. McDonald's delivery is a real problem with the drive-through.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
the cars lining up out into the parking lot.
It's a mess. It is a mess.
I've seen so many almost accidents. I've not seen an accident, but so many,
Yeah.
so near, but.
I have seen that and I have seen that also. And I think that's a great example where we didn't have a standard. We looked really closely at Wake Up Coffee. Wake Up Coffee was really challenging when it went in because of the configuration of the lots and buildings and whatnot. And it's on a roadway that we had needed the driveways separated by 300 feet and whatnot. And so there were a lot of different challenges with that particular one. But we were looking at things like queuing and making sure that we had enough queuing space and whatnot. McDonald's happened, I don't know, I don't know when that was permitted, but it was a long time ago.
You know, the problem with those drive-through standards is it's business driven. It's not, it's people go to McDonald's like crazy. That's part of the problem. I'm not sure they don't meet a lot of the standards that are written down here. But it's.
We didn't have standards before,
I
that's
know,
my
but
point.
these standards here, you might go measure and see that they meet them. I'm just saying, I don't know if they do or not, but.
So I would have
they-
had issues with the parking lot configuration also, just
Yeah.
in general.
But I'm just
So-
saying, some businesses attract more in drive-through than others. That's just
Understood,
the nature of the beast. And
understood.
that's a hard one.
It
'Cause,
is a hard one.
you know, I mean, look at Krispy Kreme when they came. My goodness.
Which I never understood. Never understood that one.
But that's an example of one that, you know, you wouldn't have expected that, you know. And I don't think you could write a standard to fit them.
And I can't justify why they have that draw on people. It's nasty.
I've never been.
What?
I've never been to Krispy Kreme. I've never had Krispy Kreme, so I don't know what the.
I'm just saying, though, it is business dependent. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, it's a very good point.
okay. Can I get a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Favor? Aye. That's it.
Wasn't me that.
You're right, it wasn't you.
The one who moved to adjourn.
Right.